Go for it.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for having me here. It's an honor to present for Mobility Brazil Conference 2019. This morning, I'm going to speak to you about Wi-Fi security in 2019. So I'll give you an overview of what is new, what's changed, what's happening with WPA3, and this is going to be a good introduction before Heather Williams speaks to you this afternoon and goes a bit deeper into the cryptography side of WPA3 and some of the vulnerabilities there. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Stephen Cooper, and I'm actually based in Australia, and I've just recently joined MIST Systems. But right now it's 4:30 a.m. I'm over in Las Vegas for the Juniper Nextwork conference. So it's the last day of the conference here today. And I'm here with the MIST Systems crew. We've got some presentations this morning, so it's a lot of fun. If you want to keep in touch with me, you can check out my blog at wificoops.com or reach out to me on Twitter at Stephen_Cooper. All right, let's get started. So briefly, what we're going to talk about today is, why do we need to change or improve Wi-Fi security? What's been wrong with Wi-Fi security? Why have we needed some enhancements? We'll talk about the new method of open guest networks, so enhanced open. And we'll talk about WPA3 Personal, so the new generation up from WPA2 Personal. And we'll talk about WPA3 Enterprise. And we'll wrap it up just talking about device considerations and support, certification process, how it ties into Wi-Fi 6 certification, and where we're at today. And that's going to be perfectly leading into Heather Williams' session later on today, and what you need to be aware of.
Hey, Stephen, just one question. Are you okay with questions during your presentation? You want us to save to the end, or you want to do it?
Yeah, sure, we can do questions throughout. I assume we've got a microphone there to pass around to people. Yeah, feel free to have questions throughout, or I'm happy to save them till the end. I don't mind.
Se alguém tiver alguma pergunta, pessoal, pode fazer, a gente faz o microfone e fica à vontade, tá? Fazer em português, em inglês, em australiano. Go ahead.
Cool. So WPA2 was standardized in 2004 as part of the IEEE 802.11i standard. So it's been 15 years since anything has really changed with the main way that we do authentication and encryption for Wi-Fi. We know that WPA2 Personal with pre-shared keys can be pretty easy to crack, either via brute force methods or using dictionary attacks. If any of you have done any security, ethical hacking courses or any sort of wireless penetration testing courses, even in the CWAP course, you pretty much find out how easy it is to capture someone's keys exchanges over the air, and you can actually reverse engineer that to sniff someone's traffic on a WPA2 personal network. So there is a lot of inherent security issues with that. There is no forward secrecy with WPA2 personal. So that's where if anyone manages to get a hold of the pre-shared key or the passphrase, they have that information to then snoop on everyone who's connected on that network. So there's nothing protecting you if that key is compromised. And really what's happened since 2004 is there's been a lot of other improvements in information security since then, not only just Wi-Fi, but other technologies as well. We've had MACsec come in on the wired and wireless side. We've had amendments with 802.1x, improvements there. Even IEEE 802.11ad, which is a 60 gigahertz wireless protocol, has some strengthened security, including AES encryption, just inherently native in the protocol. So already 802.11ad is more secure than any other Wi-Fi protocol. So there's definitely lots of things to be learned and taken into modern Wi-Fi security approaches. And the other big thing we all know this. We see this when we connect to open networks. We get the pop-up or a little prompt saying, warning, this network is insecure, protect your data. Most of us as IT professionals know that we should secure our content and information by using a virtual private network or a VPN when we are connected to these open and guest networks. But the majority of the users, everyone out there and across the world using public guest Wi-Fi, most of them don't have any idea of the inherent security risks, and we need to make it easier for them to be secure without having to do anything by themselves. So we'll talk a bit more about that. So you probably heard about the key reinstallation or LockRacc attack. This is where Heather is going to go into a bit more details as to how this is a vulnerability and what the issue is. But basically, this attack breaks this four-way handshake. So after a key exchange has taken place with WPA2, the crack attack actually can break the four-way handshake that then occurs. So it affects WPA, so the even older version of Wi-Fi protected access, WPA3 Personal and Enterprise, so it's not just pre-shared keys networks that are vulnerable. And it also really impacts 802.11r fast transition optimized roaming. That's really the big area that the vulnerability affects, especially in enterprise and commercial networks today. A lot of the vulnerabilities were on the wireless client side as well as the access point infrastructure side. So you would have seen all of the Wi-Fi vendors would have released patches for their infrastructure systems, as well as the likes of Apple, Google, Android, Intel releasing drivers to make the supplicants and the drivers on the operating systems more secure too. It actually affects 802.11ai fast initial link setup too. Now, some of you might not have heard of this new technology or this protocol, but basically it's been wrapped up into 802.11ax Wi-Fi 6. It is designed to get devices through the authentication and association process much quicker, and also used as a optimized roaming method. So if you'd like to find out more about that, at WLPC Phoenix last year in 2018, VP, who's now with, where is he with? He's with 7 Signal, I think, and he's now gone over to Ubiquiti. He's a really smart guy. He's done a wonderful presentation on the ins and outs of this protocol. So I highly recommend checking out this presentation if you want to find out a bit more about fast initial link setup. And just for an FYI, here is a screenshot of my Samsung Galaxy S10e showing support for FILS. You can see it probably about 2/3 the way down in the capabilities there. It says FILS request parameters, and you can also see that it's got some other support for parameters there. So most devices that support Wi-Fi 6 will probably be supporting FILS, but it's not a mandatory part of the Wi-Fi 6 certification. So let's talk a little bit about enhanced open. So it's the new way of doing open and unauthenticated guest Wi-Fi. So it uses what's called opportunistic wireless encryption, part of RFC 8110. It's basically providing confidentiality and data privacy over the air between a Wi-Fi access point and a Wi-Fi client. So really, when this association occurs between a device and an access point, there is encryption happening just natively. The user doesn't have to do anything. It is the two radio chipsets talking to each other and setting up encryption between them. So we'll go into a bit of detail around that. But the big thing is it provides encryption and privacy over the air of your data, but it does not provide any authentication of the user or the wireless network. So what that means is someone could still be doing a honeypot access point or a rogue access point mimicking your SSID, and your device trying to do enhanced open would be none the wiser. There's no way for your device to verify that access point is who it should be talking to. So opportunistic wireless encryption uses a Diffie-Hellman key exchange, basically embedded in the association frames. Association request frames and association response. So when the wireless client is requesting to associate to the access point and the access point sends back its response, that key exchange is embedded in those frames. So we'll have a look at that. It uses elliptic curve cryptography. Some of you might be familiar with that. It's used in PKI infrastructure for 802.1x as well. So if you've done Radius, or if you've done network security using .1x, you probably had a bit of exposure to that. And it uses 128-bit encryption based on CCMP or GCMP. So other places that Diffie-Hellman is used is very, very common. It's used in the session initialization for SSH. It's used in pretty much all web traffic using HTTPS communications, and it's definitely used in IPsec. One of the big things that you'll see as a common theme across these new enhancements in Wi-Fi security is protected management frames are mandatory. So protected management frames has gone through a few different flavors over the years. It used to be a Cisco proprietary flavor called management frame protection, and then it became an actual IEEE standard with 802.11w. Not many people have actually implemented that over the years. There's been mixed support from the client side for that. Enabling protected management frames in the past has actually broken 802.11r fast transition because it's not compatible. But you'll see that it's actually mandatory for enhanced open, and it's mandatory for WPA3 Personal. So we'll go through that. And on my blog page, where I've got some posts about configuring this on a Cisco side of things, you'll see where it's actually mandatory that you actually need to configure that on the controller. So here's a look at the probe response, basically from an access point back to a client, saying this is what it supports over the air, and you can see the authentication key management says that it supports opportunistic wireless encryption. So if you wanted to see if a wireless network was supporting OWE or enhanced open, this is the information you'd be looking for in the capabilities of the probe response. Now, let's take a look at the association process. So we've got a wireless client and an access point set up for OWE. The first step is we have the 802.11 open system authentication request. The access point then responds to that, and then we actually have the 802.11 association request. So a lot of people actually are surprised to find out about this open system authentication. It's basically from the original 802.11 standard, where the wireless clients and the access points are just verifying, yes, they're 802.11 compatible. So this is open system authentication occurs before any association occurs. So that's still there. That's still part of the open system authentication for OWE is still there. When we talk about WPA3 Personal, that has changed a bit. And then next, the access point responds with its own public key as well. And basically what's happened here is that elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman exchange has been exchanged between the access point and the client. And then we go through the four-way handshake that the devices will do. So that is separate to any 802.1x EAP method authentication. This is part of the 802.11 IRSN authentication, and then from then on the data will be encrypted. So it's not overly complicated. There's a few exchanges backwards and forwards between the client and the access point, but it's a pretty fast process. So what we see here is the association request from a Samsung Galaxy S10e going to the access point, and you can see that it's supporting the authentication key management of OWE. And then right down the bottom, we see the Diffie-Hellman parameters and the key that it's sending through to the access point. So you can see the public key there. Next, we'll take a look at the association response, and it sends back its own public key there and parameter. And you see at the top there, it says status code successful. That's what we want to see. If for some reason the client can't associate, we'll be looking in this association response to see if there's anything but successful in that status code. And then the four-way handshake occurs, so you can see the EPOL frames being sent backwards and forwards there. And then after that, the frames are then encrypted. So another thing to consider with both Enhanced Open and WPA2 Personal is, WPA3 Personal, is there's transition modes that are available. So this is designed to make it easier to transition from the legacy authentication encryption methods to the new ones, but there are some caveats, so we'll talk about that. Basically, it's really just a hidden SSID being broadcast with OWE enabled. So you're not actually improving anything on your Wi-Fi overhead. You still actually have two SSIDs. One is available for legacy clients and one is available for OWE clients, and it's actually hidden. But what actually happens is when you do the configuration in the backend in your wireless LAN infrastructure is a standard open SSID, so not enhanced open, is configured, and it actually knows the wireless LAN ID of the OWE SSID, and that is then contained into the information elements for that SSID, so that OWE compatible clients can read that information element and go, right, I now need to switch to this hidden SSID with a wireless LAN ID of whatever's been configured. So basically, that's how it does it. It's similar to how, for example, when you have a Cisco network using adaptive 802.11r fast transition, and in the beacon frames, there's the hidden information elements that Apple iOS devices recognize and can associate using 802.11r. It's a similar method on how that's done. So let's take a quick look at that. Oops, sorry, I'll go back down there. So as I mentioned, I've got some configuration examples on my blog, and this is the actual information element in the beacon that tells devices that are compatible with Enhanced Open or OWE that there is a hidden wireless SSID there. You can see it's listed the BSSID there, which is essentially the MAC address of the other hidden BSSID, and it's actually got the SSID in plain text. So my original broadcast SSID was just COOPS, COOPS, and then you can see there that the SSID it's referencing is COOPS-OWE. So that's a look at the actual key information and the authentication and encryption details and the information elements. This is the beacon from the hidden SSID. So you actually see there, you can see both SSIDs if you're doing a scan in WinFi or Wi-Fi Explorer, but basically only devices that are compatible with seeing this will actually recognize it. You can see that the SSID parameter set has a wildcard in there. Devices that don't support it won't even recognize this SSID. So now let's have a look at WPA3 Personal. So this uses simultaneous authentication of equals. This does provide forward secrecy, so this fixes one of the big problems and vulnerabilities that WPA2 Personal has. So no longer do you actually need a complex passphrase. So we all know that basically the way to get a bit more robustness in the security of our WPA2 Personal networks is to use a very complex multi-character passphrase, many characters long. You could use special characters, you can use underscores, uppercase, lowercase, numbers, but that still doesn't provide forward secrecy if that password is compromised. Whereas with WPA3 Personal, you could actually use a password of password and it would be more secure than WPA2 Personal. So we can't actually decrypt individual sessions over the air. So that was what I was mentioning as a big weakness of WPA2 Personal. Even if we capture the association and authentication process over the air, we can't reverse engineer that and do that. But Heather will go into some more details as to how that can actually be broken. As I mentioned, for Enhanced Open, protected management frames is mandatory for WPA3 Personal. unless we are running transition mode. So I'll talk a bit more about transition mode for that in a few slides. Fast transition is not actually supported in WPA3 Personal. So because fast transition is inherently incompatible with management frame protection or protected management frames, it does not work on WPA3 Personal. So they're working on that and bringing that into a later version of WPA3. So for now, roaming will be based on PMKRD caching. Or if you have a Wi-Fi 6 compatible client that supports fast initial link setup, that can be used for optimal roaming. I believe any Wi-Fi vendors or the actual device manufacturers are actually supporting that for optimized roaming today. So that might come in future. So this is just a quick view of the probe response for WPA3 Personal. This is the access point showing what its capabilities are. We can see the authentication key management of SAE, simultaneous authentication of equals, and we can see that it's using SHA-256. And we can see some further information down there under the robust security network information capabilities. So now let's take a look at the authentication process. Now this is really the big change here. So remember I mentioned we have open system authentication is there in pretty much all association processes today with the current Wi-Fi security standards. This is where everything has changed with WPA3 Personal. So instead of open system authentication, we actually have an SAE authentication process taking place. So what happens is the Wi-Fi device will send a commit message to an access point. The access point will respond with its commit message. Then we will see a confirm message come from the client back to the access point, and the access point will then send its confirm. So this is where some simultaneous authentication of equals is providing protection and forward secrecy of the passphrases. Basically, this is occurring before that passphrase is used to generate the pairwise master key for this session. So this is basically securing everything, encrypting everything before the authentication occurs. So then we have a normal association request and response, and then we have the four-way handshake, and then everything is encrypted and authenticated after that too. So here we actually see the first message being sent. So this is the commit type message. We can see that highlighted, and this is coming from the client to the access point. And it's sending through some scalar information and finite field elements. That's basically another cryptography method that SAE is using to provide the encryption here. Then we can see message 2 in the next frame down. The access point sends its commit message back to the Wi-Fi client. Then we see message 3. The client sends its confirm message type back to the access point. And lastly, we see the access point respond with its confirm. And then this is the actual association part where it actually says that it's going to associate with simultaneous authentication of equals. And we see the status code of successful in the next frame below. Now let's take a look at transition mode. So similar to Enhanced Open, we have a transition mode that is allowing legacy clients to connect to a wireless LAN that is enabled for both WPA3 Personal and WPA2 Personal. So this is actually different from Enhanced Open. Instead of having a duplicate hidden SSID, this is actually configured for support on the same SSID. So basically you have both WPA2 and WPA3 configured on the same SSID, and you have both pre-shared key and simultaneous authentication of equals configured for authentication key management. That you will actually use the same passphrase for both authentication methods. So this is where you can start to see that, yes, transition modes might be useful to have support for both the old and the new, but given the fact that it's both the same passphrase used for pre-shared key and simultaneous authentication of equals, even if that passphrase has forward secrecy with its simultaneous authentication of equals, we can still reverse engineer it for a WPA2 client and then still get access to that information over the air. So it's not fully secure. This is where protected management frames needs to be set to optional, and you need to disable 802.11r fast transition. So if you've got this transition mode happening with a mix of different clients, let's say you were using 802.11r fast transition for some voice clients for smooth roaming, you've now lost that capability just because you want stronger encryption on the same SSID. So you have to be aware that transition mode doesn't always necessarily mean good things. It might seem easier to migrate to in the short term, but really there might be some issues with the security there. Again, I've got some configuration examples on my blog if you want to check that out on the Cisco side of things. This is just taking a look at the beacon, and we can see that both capabilities are supported under Authentication Key Manager. We can see both pre-shared key and simultaneous authentication of equal support there. Now let's take a look at WPA3 Enterprise just quickly. Really, what are a lot of enhancements that come with this is really improving the cryptography and the strength of the encryption for WPA3 Enterprise. Essentially, it still operates the same way as what we're used to with 802.1x security and EAP methods over the air, but basically the minimum level of encryptions have been improved. So these are the different encryption mechanisms that can be supported, which really actually form what's called the NSA, or the National Security Agency Suite B cryptography standard. Really what this means is we're making sure that we can't set up a quantum computer to go in there and work and try and brute force and hack its way into a WPA3 enterprise network. These methods of encryption are pretty much proven to be the most secure that we can use, and that's designed to provide enterprise-grade security, from now into the future. And it's also a big requirement for government and federal agencies, Defense Force. They require all these sorts of encryption methods on wired and wireless networks. Protected management frames is mandatory, and again, you'll be losing the features of 802.11r fast transition on those particular networks. So roaming will be based on PMKID caching. If your devices and your Wi-Fi vendor support fast initial link setup, that could be used for roaming in the future. So now let's just talk about the landscape of device support today, what it means for certification. So it's actually mandatory for WPA3 Personal to be supported by the devices and the access points for Wi-Fi 6 certification. WPA3 Enterprise support is optional, and enhanced open is optional. So, what's interesting, if you're working on the vendor side or working on a managed service provider side, and potentially you're responding to a tender or an RFP for a customer, you'll start to see requirements for Wi-Fi 6 certified access points to be submitted in the proposals. You'll possibly start seeing WPA3 come in as a requirement too. So you can have some assurity that if a device is Wi-Fi 6 certified, it should be WPA3 Personal compatible as well at a minimum. So clients that are supporting WPA3 that I'm aware of today, Galaxy S10 series, initial support came in an Android Pie, full support's coming in an Android Q. Apple iOS 13 devices, including iPad OS, supports it. I'm not sure if WPA3 Enterprise is coming yet. I haven't actually seen that available on a public code release for a Wi-Fi vendor. I know Aruba has that in a beta code. Microsoft Windows 10 actually supports WPA3 as well on a preview build for WPA3 Personal. So it's slowly getting there. But one of the reasons as to why this adoption is slow and it's been a bit staggered is basically what Heather will go into this afternoon, is because there are some vulnerabilities in WPA3 Personal. There's very likely going to be some changes happening there. Next, I just wanted to give you a quick look at this nice article from Apple about iOS devices. So you're probably aware that each device manufacturer has different algorithms of how it prioritizes the order of which SSIDs it connects to. You know, every device has its own roaming and you know, channel and access point BSSID association process that it has. It'll prefer 5 gigahertz over 2.4 in some cases. It'll choose wider channels over narrow channels in some cases. But in terms of encryption and security, this is just a nice table to refer to understand whether your devices are going to prefer WPA3 over WPA2. So Apple has already said that, you know, on private and public networks, it will prefer WPA3 over WPA2 if it has both of those known networks stored in there. So I recommend checking out this article, finding out a bit more about that. Lastly, let's just do some considerations. Sorry.
Question, Stephen. So when you mentioned about the devices, so device support for WPA3, any comments about the other stuff that you mentioned, like the enhanced open, all these feature capabilities that you mentioned? We assume if this is WPA3 Personal, it does support like enhanced open or not?
Sorry, could you repeat that again, Fabio? It's just a bit quiet coming through there.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's right.
Yeah, let me see if you can listen to me better here.
Yeah,
so you mentioned about the device support.
Yeah.
So in terms of device support, any comments about the enhanced open support in devices today, or?
So what I've tested myself, it definitely is supported on iOS 13 and Samsung Galaxy S10s. So my 2 blog articles have been on Enhanced Open and WPA3 Personal. And I've tested that on iPhones running iOS 13, as well as iPad running the iPad OS beta, as well as the public release. And my Galaxy S10 was running Android Pie, and that was supported on there too. So basically, what I go into some detail on my blog is comparing to an older iPhone, for example, like an iPhone 8 that wasn't running iOS 13, and it couldn't see the hidden transition mode enhanced open SSID. And when you try to connect to the WPA3 Personal SSID, it thinks it's an EAP enabled, you know, WPA2 Enterprise SSID. It asks for a username and password. It doesn't understand what to do with it. So that's another caution, basically, in the considerations is going, if you're going to deploy, you know, these new security methods on your SSIDs, you need to educate your users on what may or may not happen for different device support. So this is the point here about you need to know how many of your devices in your environment support these new methods before moving to them. Basically, some of the screenshots that I've shown of the capabilities and probe requests and responses will give you an insight as to which devices will support it. Some of you are probably familiar with Mike Albano's website, clients.mikealbano.com. He will start to add in WPA3 support capabilities as a separate column in there as we get more and more support for that on these devices. And I also just want to caution again about transition modes. Heather's going to talk a bit more about this afternoon as well. But just because transition modes are designed to make things easier to move from legacy to new and support both at the same time, you do lose some enhancements of that security. You lose some of the benefits and some of the robustness of doing that. So WPA3 version 2, yes, that's probably going to happen next year. So stay tuned for Heather's session. She's going to go a lot deeper in the cryptography side of things and how it can be broken, and basically further research that the researchers that found the LockRacc Attack found some vulnerabilities in WPA3. And, you know, we'll see some changes next year. We'll see improvements come out in Wi-Fi infrastructure, as well as software updates for client devices that will then support these enhancements. So that's what I wanted to cover. I was trying to make up a little bit of time there. I know we started off a bit late. I didn't want to run into German's session too much. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. what I will do is I'll give the full PowerPoint deck to Flavio or Gustavo, so you'll have the notes that are in here as well. It'll be the PowerPoint version, not PDF. So you'll see the notes that I've got in the slides there, and you'll have access to the hyperlinks in there to access the articles that I've linked to in there. Thank you very much.